Well, you'll see. We'll jump right into it and you'll see. We begin with number one, is the Gemara in Ksuvos, Daf Pei Vav. If Shimon takes a loan from Reuven, we know that Shimon has to pay back. That's obvious. The shaila is why. In the end of Baba Basra, the Gemara quotes as a major machlokes, if when Shimon takes a loan from Reuven, does Reuven have a lien over Shimon's property? And therefore Shimon has to pay, there's a lien on his property, to the point that if he refuses to pay, Reuven has the right to, through Beis, to forcibly take Shimon's assets. Because at the time of the loan, Shimon's assets, there was a lien created on them towards Reuven. That's one opinion. Rav Papa says no. Rav Papa says Minat Torah, there's no such thing as Shibud Nechasim. Rav Papa holds that Minat Torah, if somebody borrows money from somebody else, their property is not mortgaged, there's no lien to the lender. There happens just to be an obligation for Shimon to pay back. He bases on a pasuk where it says, Hin shelcha tzedek, when back in the day when you would go to the market and you would buy something, so how do you know you're getting a kilo or a pound or something? There was always weights. But you had to trust the vendor, the seller, that their weights were correct. And the Torah speaks about it. Hin shelcha tzedek, make sure the volumes of weight that you have, that you're weighing against, are truthful and there's no fraud. But there's a drasha, the Gemara says, the word hin, which is an amount, can also be read as hein. Hein shelcha tzedek. When you say you're going to do something, hein shelcha, when you say you're going to do hein, tzedek, you have to justify it and actually carry through. And we see from there, one has to cash in on their words, so to speak. And that's where Rav Papa learns that if Shimon borrows from Reuven, he has to pay back. It's a commitment, it's a verbal commitment. And Minat Torah, Shimon's assets are not mortgaged to Reuven at all. So the Gemara, that's a Gemara in the end of Baba Basra. Fine. Number one is the Gemara in Ksuvos Daf Pei Vav. Amalei Rav Kana Rav Papa. Rav Kana asks Rav Papa a simple question. According to you, why does someone have to pay back a loan? No. We just said it's like a moral obligation. So you know what the shaila is? What if the guy says, I don't want to do it? You see, according to Rav Papa's, those that dispute with him and believe that your possessions are mortgaged to the lender, if you don't want to pay, the Beis will just collect from your property. They'll sell your assets whether you like it or not. But according to Rav Papa, what if the guy says, Ich will nicht? So that's the shaila in Ksuvos Daf Pei Vav number one. Rav Kana says to Rav Papa, Lididach, according to you, the Amras, you say, Pri is Bal Choiv mitzvah. Paying a choiv is an obligation. It's just a mitzvah. Paying back a loan is just a mitzvah. Like we explained, you made a verbal commitment and therefore you have to follow through. So Amar loy nichali, what if the guy says, I'm not interested, the avid mitzvah? What if Shimon says, you know what, I'm not feeling it today. I'm not feeling that spiritual today. And the heavenly obligation that I have to fill my commitment on paying back, I'm not interested in fulfilling. What's going to happen then? So, now the way the Ritva explains, even according to Rav Papa, rabbinically, a person's properties are mortgaged to the seller. Therefore, midrabanan, if the Shimon says, I don't want to pay, the Beis Din always has the right to descend to his assets and sell them to pay back the lender. But Rav Kana's shaila was, Rav Papa, Minat Torah, you hold it's just a moral obligation. What if the guy says he doesn't want? What does the Torah say about that? How could the Eibishter give such a loophole, when it comes to commerce, to loans, etc.? That was the challenge of Rav Kana to Rav Papa. That's the way the Ritva understands it. Either way, Amar Le, so Rav Papa said to Rav Kana, you got to know something. Tanina, there's a Brisa. Now the Brisa says the following: Ba'med Dvarim Amurim. The Gemara quotes the Brisa a few times, never quotes the beginning, only quotes the end. The way Rashi learns in Ksuvos is like this. And this is a simple way of learning. The Beis is saying like this: Bamed dvarim amurim, that you give 39 lashes and not more. b'mitzvahs loisase, if somebody violated a loisase. We know if someone violates a loisase, as long as it carries an action, it fills the criteria of the type of loisase that gets malchus, then you will get malchus 39, no more. But when it comes to a mitzvah saseh, Kagoin, for example, we tell a guy, say sukkah. It's the middle of sukkah and a guy's not interested in sitting in the sukkah. We tell him, no, make the sukkah. But pashtus, the word asay sukkah doesn't mean make the sukkah, it means to sit in the sukkah. There's a discussion about that. But what if the guy says, no, I'm not interested? We say asay lulav. Lulav, the eina oisa, he's not interested. Makin oisai achetet say nafshe. The Gemara says, the Beis says, we will beat him until he says, okay, I will do it. So says Rav Papa to Rav Kana, if this Shimon refuses to pay his loan, we will beat him. The truth is, we don't have to beat him. When it comes to the loan, we'll just take his assets and sell them. We'll force him in another way. See, by the sukkah and the lulav, he has to do it with his body. So we're going to give him petch until he acquiesces. But when it comes to the loan, it's the same idea. We'll force him. We don't have to twist his arm. We'll just, take the money from his bank or we'll sell his land, etc. Fine. That's a Gemara in Ksuvas.
Doesn't that contradict himself?
How so?
How are you going to force somebody to sell his assets?
No. We'll sell it for him. Beis Din will sell it on his behalf. Yeah. Beis Din will sell it. They'll confiscate it. There's something also known as hefker, Beis Din hefker. Beis Din really has the power at certain times to claim anybody's property if it's warranted. But you don't even need that vort of your hefker, Beis Din hefker. It's a vort of kfiyah. Here it's a din that will force the guy.
It means force. So he's unconscious.
You're typing it as to Tates and Nafshe.
Literally, it's mashma. You go and you go and you go until he agrees. And if he doesn't agree, you'll go and go. And if he dies, well, that's his problem. We'll see. Not everyone agrees with that. We'll see. Right now, we're just touching simply. Exactly. Okay. Good. Now, if you look at number 3, go right underneath. How does it connect to this week's parsha? Because the number 3 is a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, right underneath. The Gemara says, the Tanya, it's a Gemara Davav. Yakriv ois, it says in this week's parasha about Karbonos, it's the extra words. Yakriv oisai. The person who has to bring the carbon will bring the carbon. Malamada teaches me, boy, is he going to bring. Shekayfan oisai will force him. Says the Beis, Yochel, you might think Baal Karchai, mamish against his will. Talmud Lerma Lertzaina, but in this week's parsha you have a problem. On the one hand, the words Yakriv says mashma, boy, is he going to bring it whether he likes it or not. But the pasuk says Lertzaina, the guy has to want. So Hakate said, how do these two things play together? Says the Beis, it's simple. You twist his arm until he says he wants. Kaifan say, you force him ad sheyomer roitzani until he says I want. Look right underneath that Tosfos there in Rosh Hashanah. Yakriv oisai, we're number 4 now. Malamed, that teaches me shekayfin, so we force him. Says Tosfos, it's really everywhere. Kol mitzvahs essay nami kayfin. Really every mitzvah essay you'll force. Kedama beperk nairish and ispatza. Just like we quoted. That Tosfos there is quoting from Ksuvas Daf Mem Tes. It's a mistake. It's meant to be what we saw in number 1, Ksuvas Daf Pei Vav. But either way, continues Tosfos in number 4. We learned in Ksuvas, Makinoi such a Teitze Nafshoy. We hit a guy until, So Tosfos wants to know, why is the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah learning out a special pasuk from this week's parasha about Karbonos? It's true by every mitzvah saseh. So Tosfos just says, l'cher, what's pretty obvious. You know why you need a pasuk by the carbon? Mishum desalka died today in kaifin kan. You would think you can't force lefisha kosav l'tzonik. It says he has to want. By all the other mitzvahs, it doesn't say l'tzonik. The guy has to desire. So the fact you could force him makes sense. But by Karbonos, you would think you can't force because you have this conundrum of l'tzonik, he has to want. The chiddush is that there's an idea.
Says that Achetetz Nafshe doesn't mean to kill him; it means to kaif him. They say to force. That's the.
But we don't want to kill the guy. We want the guy to do the mitzvah.
Wear him down.
But until if he is an action of Dr. Ich will nicht, he's going to bring his death upon himself.
Physical torture.
Okay. Well, let's see. We might see about that. Anyhow, so that's the chiddush of the carbon is that you're able to force It says Lurtsoinoi. As soon as you hear him say he wants, because he wants the torture to end, that's good enough. That's good enough. Okay, fine. So this is true in this week's parsha, but it's really true across the whole Torah. Look at number 2. Back to number 2. Okay, we're going to see some fascinating things in Mitzvah Hashem. This is a Gemara in Chulin Daf Kuf Yud. The Gemara says a story. There was an Amoira who ended up in Pumbedisa, which was the city of Rav Chisda. Now, in that city, they did not eat a chal, the udder of a cow. There's a whole siman in Shulchan Aruch. The udder of the cow is basar. It's full of chalav. In order to eat it, it's a complicated process of how to kasher it and eat it. And the Gemara says that it's 2 pages. The Gemara says that there were different customs. Oh, here's a set. There were different customs, if they would allow it or not. In Pumbedisa, they didn't allow it. This Amoira ended up in Pumbedisa. He was a poor man. He's wearing borrowed clothes. He had no food. It was Erev Yom Kippur. You have to have a meal. So all the people in Pumbedisa had shechted animals to have some good flesh for the Erev Yom Kippur meal. And the chal, the udders of the cows, they threw in the street. This Amoira happened to come from a city called Suda, where Rav Yehuda was the Rav, and Rav Yehuda allowed to eat the udder if you kasher it properly. So this poor Amoira gathered all these chals, and he actually went. He didn't want to break the custom of the city of Pumbedisa, so he exited the city. He went out of the tchum of the city, and he made a little bonfire, and he roasted the chals. He was caught, and he was brought before Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda wanted to know, who is this guy? What are you eating the udders of the cow? We don't do this in Pumbedisa. Anyhow, Rav Chisda threw many kashas at the guy, challenged him. The guy wasn't wearing tzitzis. Where's your tzitzis? He says, Rav Yehuda, it's a borrowed garment. And Rav Yehuda says that a borrowed garment for 30 days, you don't need tzitzis. Where was your tefillin? He wasn't wearing tefillin. I have stomach pains, diarrhea. I'm not, He had an excuse for everything. Why were you eating the udders in Pumbedisa? I was right outside the tchum. A whole story. Anyhow, Rav Chisda Mamash is berating the guy, but look at number 2. Ad hochi, while Rav Chisda, the Rav in Pumbedisa, is harassing this unknown Amoira, as Aisua lahu gavra, they bring a guy to the Rav Chisda's Beis Medrash, or his Bezdin, Deloy have a moiker avu ve'ime that wasn't honoring his parents. Kaftuhu, they tied the guy up, back in the day, not just in the times of the Gemara, even a couple of hundred years ago in Europe. If someone was an Avarian, if someone was an open transgressor, they would tie him to a pole, and people would walk by and spit at him, and it was highly degrading. So that's what they kaftu, they push it. So either means they tied him up, and they wanted to be kaifim because honoring your parents, the mitzvah saseh. They were going to twist his arm until he was ready to honor his parents. So Amalahu, this unknown Amoira, the Gemara says his name, I forgot his name. An unknown person, he tells Rav Chisda, Shavku, leave the guy alone. To Tanya, because there's another Beis, Kol mitzvah saseh, shematan schora b'tzida, any mitzvah saseh that the Torah says do it and it gives the reward, ein bezdin shamatam muzharin oleh. Bezdin down here doesn't get involved. Rashi explains, most mitzvah saseh in the Chumash, it doesn't say what the reward is. It doesn't say. Why in some cases does it say? To teach you that the Torah says, honor your parents, l'man yarichun yomecha. You know why, says Rashi? It's to teach you a message. If you want arichas yamim, honor your parents. If you don't honor your parents, you won't get the reward. But that is the consequence of your lack of fulfillment. The Torah is saying it's up to you. I'm offering you a big reward if you do the mitzvah. You don't do the mitzvah, you don't get the reward. But that's it. Bezdin shouldn't stick their nose in and try and force you to do the mitzvah. That's the rationale of this brisa. So this guy tells Rav Chisda, you got it wrong. You can't force someone by kibud aveim, because by the Aseres Adibris both times in Yisro and Veschanon, the Torah says you're going to get a reward. So Amar Leis, Rav Chisda tells the guy, Chazina lach de charif tuv, I see you're a sharp fellow. Amar Leis, he told him back, Yehavez ba'asred Rav Yehud, if you would be in my city, where Rav Yehuda's the Rav, and I wasn't afraid of you, Achvina lach rufa, I'll really show you how sharp I really am. That's the story.
He enjoyed his meal.
No, exactly.
Everything else is
Salami
okay. Now I had a
sandwiches.
little chutzpah.
No, so there was
You let him go at the end with the...
yeah. He got out of all of his attacks. He got out of. Reb Chaim Shmulevitz in Eretz Yisrael was a big Baal Musar in Eretz Yisrael. Yeah. No, but he was. I think he had nice yachas with Chabad, as far as I know. Anyhow, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz says, imagine this guy. This guy was a poor man. He can't wear tefillin. This Amor that was visiting, because he has issues with his stomach. He's wearing borrowed clothes. He has nothing to eat on Erev Yom Kippur. He's taking the strewn udders that were thrown out of people's homes. He's walking a mile out of town, making a little bonfire. Nebuch, he could have knocked on somebody's door and asked him to come in for a Suda Erev Yom Kippur. They would have invited him in. You know what you see from here? If you're able to make it work without coming on to others' assistance, that was a derech of tzaddikim. Anyhow, but al kaponim, so far we have no questions. We have halacha. The halacha by karbonis really applies everywhere. You can always force by a mitzvah saseh, seemingly to no end. But then we have a mitigating factor, the Gemara in Chulin number 2, that if the mitzvah saseh has the schar written next to it, then Bezin has no business mixing him. So here's the issue. What?
Doesn't Shemaya say general schar for mitzvah?
We're going to get... that's exactly... What?
Carbon is also a reward. You're getting your sin gets clean. Bringing up carbon so you're kind of getting the reward from that too.
The Torah does... Right, it's not a reward. You owe it. You need a kapara. Right. Anyhow, look at number 5. Number 5, here we begin. A Gemara in Baba Basra Daf Ches. The Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Baravua. Lefisha Mamashkin Alat Tzedakah. When it comes to the obligation to give tzedakah, Bezin has the right to go to your house and take a mashkin. You say you don't have any cash available, no problem. We're going to take your silver candelabra. We'll take it's a half a year before Tishrei. We're going to take your silver esrog box, and when you come up with the gelt, we'll give it back to you. Vafilu be'erev Shabbos. So the Gemara said that's the power of those that are collecting tzedakah. Ein, he says the Gemara, it's not true. V'haksiv upakadati al kol leichsav. The pasuk says the Eibush is going to take vengeance on all those that harass the Yidden. And Amar Rab Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta Mishmei Derav. Those that oppress the Yidden. Afilu al gabay tzedakah. That you know who's considered the oppressors? The Gaboim, that when they give you an aliyah and then they demand who knows what. God says he's gonna recall them. Says the Gemara, loy kasha. It's not a kasha. It depends. Hard to amid, hard to loy amid. It depends on the financial status of the person. If the guy can't afford it, then the Gabbai is really an oppressor. If the guy could afford, then a Gabbai is doing a great thing. And then the Gemara quotes the story. Ki hard the Rava, like Rava, achfe, he forced Rav Nosson Barami. The Shakulman, he took from him arba mez 400 zuz l'tzedakah for tzedakah. Apparently, this Rav Nosson Barami was a man of means, and Rava therefore had the right to coerce him to give tzedakah. So the Gemara here clearly says, if somebody has the means to do it, then the Gaboyim, those that represent the community, those that represent the Bezdin, have the power to coerce like Rava himself did. Here's the $1 million kasha. In Parshas Re'eh, when the Torah speaks about tzedakah, you know what it says? Give tzedakah ki beglal hadover zeh, because I'm going to bench you because of this. The mitzvah of tzedakah is a mitzvah saseh that the schar is written right next to it. If you open Parshas Re'eh, the pasuk says, Nosen titein, posayach tiftach, make sure you give. And it says, ki beglal hadover zeh, yivarecha Hashem lekecha, God will bench you. So according to what we learned, Bezdin has no business enforcing tzedakah. And this is the kasha of all the Rishonim and their second cousins, nephews. Look at number 6. Taisis and Baba Basra. Achvei l'Rav Nosson. On the Gemara that we learned in number 5 comes Taisis in number 6. Vim Taimar, how could Rava do this? Vaba Perkol Habasa, we learned in Chulin on number 2 in our sheet. Amar Kol Mitzvah says Shematan Schara Ksuva B'Tzid. If the schar is written next to it, Aim Bezin Shomata Musar. Bezin Shomata has no business sticking their nose in. The gabet stock ksiv ki pasach tiftach, open your hand. Uksiv ki beglal adover zeh, because it's gvecha, God will bench you. Simple kasha. All the Rishonim asked this question. So how does Tosfos get out of this? Va'amar Rabbeinu Tam, says Rabbeinu Tam, the high kfiyah bidvarim, when it says that Rava coerced him, it means verbally. Verbal coercion. And then he quotes K'may Kafya Va'ol, okay, we'll leave that Gemara out. But that's, Rabbeinu Tam says that it was a verbal coercion. Okay. Va'oi tiritz.
Matnas Chorm B'tziro, if it's Mesuyim, like Aruchas Yamim, but Stam Yivroch Hashem, well, Hashem is always going to bless. Maybe that's not a Mesuyim dika, a specific dika.
Okay, I hear. On the other hand, what Rashi says in Chulin is, Rashi says the reason for this din is, why does some mitzvahs it doesn't say God will bless you, and some mitzvahs it does? It's extra words. If Hashem's always going to bless you, then it never has to say by any mitzvah that God will bench you. It must be teaching you a halacha, that the cost of not doing the mitzvah is not getting the bracha associated with it. So even though the bracha here is by stock is very general, the fact that Torah said it, you can still apply the logic, is to teach you that if you don't do it, the cost will be the bracha, and that's it. Va'oi tiritz, Rabbeinu Tam says further.
During the coercion, right? If somebody promises to tzedakah and doesn't give, why does Beis have to? Why do we leave it up to God? Why are we playing?
We learn out from a pasuk. Moitzes vasecha tishmor, but it's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Davov that Beis has the right to enforce your pledge.
I know. Why is some things?
But there's two things. There's when you pledge to give. Even here's when you don't pledge. There's two things. The Beis can enforce you to fulfill your vows, your pledges, mitzad the laws of Nadarim. Then there's the laws of tzedakah that Beis can also enforce. Everyone has a mitzvah to give tzedakah. You have a communal responsibility. One.
It's the same thing to your blessing, where sometimes it's a given, and sometimes they specifically say you're going to give up. But why you switch it around with? Why don't you leave it up to God? For all accounts.
Oh, B'chlal, well, go back to number one. No, that the Beis Din has the right to enforce anyone to. That's part of Beis Din's responsibility.
I think that's the right, but why? I mean, back it up a little. Why do?
Oh, that's shoiftim v'shoitrim titin l'chol b'chol sharecha. The reason that one of the main duties of a Beis Din is to make sure people keep their mitzvahs. In fact, by the Zion mitzvahs of the Goyim, one of them is to appoint judges to do what? To enforce the other 6 mitzvahs. That's the purpose of a Beis Din, to make sure that Yiddishkeit is kept. And it's no one could say it's my own business. We're going to get more into the mitzvah as we go further. Let's go.
Pledge, right? This is about
Right, this is not a pledge. Right,
this is to make you
exactly. That's why I mentioned when it comes to tzedakah, there's really 2 things. If somebody makes a pledge to give, so that's a Gemara Rosh Hashanah Davav. Beis Din Mamish has the right to coerce you, and really you have an obligation to give that right away. The Gemara discusses when it comes to a korban, if you vow a korban to the Eibishter, so you have time to bring it. The Torah says, Baal Ta'achar, you can't delay it. The Shaila is that 1 Yom Tov, 2 Yom Tov, 3 Yom Tov, a whole discussion over there. But Rava says when it comes to tzedakah, you make a pledge, you've got to give it right, you have an obligation. But that's as far as the neder. Over here we're speaking just the mitzvah of tzedakah. Beis Din can coerce you.
He said mamshichin, all that stuff.
Mamashkin, take a mashkin.
That's after he pledged.
No, lav davka. No, it's just if you owe. The Gemara there discusses as far as a communal obligation. If there's
Tax.
yeah, it could be taxes on the city, right?
I don't know how you see that.
So let's go back in Tosfos number 6. I think as we see more things will become clearer and apparent. Let's go weiter. So Rabbeinu Tam says it was verbal kfir. Verbal kfir. Exactly. So actually, before we go weiter in Tosfos, let me just show you why Rabbeinu Tam's pshat is highly difficult to accept. Obviously, with all due respect, and he probably doesn't think so highly of me either. But if you look in Ksuvas number 7, Ksuvas Daf Mem Tes, tell me what you think. We're at number 7 now. Just to analyze the Rabbeinu Tam we saw in number 6. This is a Gemara in Ksuvas Daf Mem Tes. Number 7. Be'usha hiskin, in the city of Usha, they made a takana. Shei Adam zones bonov ves b'noisav k'shehen ktanim. There's a big shiloh. The parents, does a father really need to give food to his kid? His kid's hungry, he'll go to shul, he'll ask some people for help. Does the father have any more of an obligation to support his child more than anybody else? It's an emotional question, and it sounds ludicrous, but on the other hand, as far as law, you have to know. You have to know what exactly is the legal obligation to the point that Beis Din can enforce it, The father doesn't have a job, and the kids are eating by other people's homes. Does the father need to get a job to feed his kids or he doesn't have to. And that's what the Gemara is discussing there at length. And the Gemara there quotes a takana they made in Usha, which by the way we're going to see that this takana wasn't accepted.
What happens if he has a job? He wants somebody else to feed them.
Right?
Where's
That's the
Usha?
same thing.
Same thing. Can he throw them on the tzibur? To be mashlach them on the tzibur. Where is Usha? I don't know. Where is Usha? Somewhere. Yes, yeah, somewhere there. Shei Adam zon is bana v'ez b'neisav. Somebody once asked the Rebbe, he's going to Eretz Yisrael, where are the holy places he should visit? The Rebbe said, I don't have a chush in Mekaymas HaKadoshim. I don't know, holy places. I could send you to the Frierdiker Rebbe. A holy place in Eretz Yisrael, I don't have a chush in you go to the Yam HaMelech for therapy, for physical, something else. Anyhow.
That's Kodesh.
Look at number 7. So they made a takana that a person should feed his kids and daughters kashen ktanim. In other words, like this: until a kid is 6 years old, there's an obligation, a legal obligation, and Bezdin can enforce that. Usha said until bar and bas mitzvah. See, boy, the Gemara says hilchas kavosei or ain't hilchas kavosei. The Gemara wants to know was that takana they made in Usha. What did it become a formal law or not? And the Gemara says no, it didn't. Toshma, I'll prove it to you. There was a fellow that wasn't willing to feed his 8 or 9-year-old boy. He said, let them go to the soup kitchen and eat something. Armaluhu, and Rav Yehuda said, Yorud Yalda. A type of bird gives birth to a child. Vabnei Mosa Shadya, and casts him onto the community. What did Rav Yehuda do? He couldn't enforce it, but he verbally shamed the person. Verbal humiliation. Ki hava asala kamed Rav Chisda, similar thing. Amalu, he said, kaful asisa, turn over a mortar pot or something, bitzibur in public. Veleikum, let the father stand on it. Veleim, and he should say, urva boy banei, the urva, the raven, desires its kids. Vahu garva loy boy banei, and I myself don't care about my kids. So you see, Rav Chisda took a similar tact. I can't coerce the guy to take care of the kids between the ages of 6 and bar and bas mitzvah, but I can publicly shame them. So the Gemara Stam asks, wait a second, v'urva boy bonei, does a raven care about the kids? It says in Tilim, libnei oidev asher yikro, the children of the ravens are always calling out to God because their parents don't care about them. It says in Maloi Kasha, it's not a kasha. Ha b'chivri, ha b'uchmi, it depends, white ravens or black ravens. Either way, the Gemara says next, Ki hava asala kamei Rava. A similar story, there was a father who wasn't taking care of his kids, his boys and girls between the ages of 6 and bar and bas mitzvah. So Amalei Rava said, Nicha loch mitazni bonech mitztaka? Do you want your kids to be sustained from staka? You see from all these stories of Yehuda, Rav Chisda, and Rava, they could not enforce the father to give. They just chastised him. Okay? So the Gemara is proving the takan of Usha was never formally accepted. But here's the clincher. Says the Gemara, V'loy amaron, this wasn't said, Ella deloy amid, only if the guy is not a man of means. Aval amid, but if the father's a man of means, then he can't send his kids to the soup kitchen. Kafina le'al karchi, we will force him. Ki ha de Rav, we quote the same stories we saw in number 5. Rav kafya Rav Nassim Barami, he forced him apik minei 400 zuzlet staka. So if you could force someone to give staka to the community, how much more so you could force the father to give to the kids? This Gemara l'chayra stands in direct contradiction to Rabbeinu Tam. What did Rabbeinu Tam say? Rabbeinu Tam said about the Gemara number 5, when can you enforce staka? The Gemara says if a guy is a man of means you could enforce. Says Rabbeinu Tam, it's only verbal enforcement because staka is matan schora b'tzida. Bezdin can never get their hands dirty. It's verbal coercion, which means if he's a man of means, you could use verbal coercion. If he's not, you don't even have that. That's the Gemara here in number 7 says no. When the father couldn't afford it, the father was shamed. Which means if he could afford it, it must be you force him. It's a major kasha Rabbeinu Tam. So the Chidah quotes for some earlier sources, it could be there's different levels of verbal coercion. When Rava, how did Rava coerce the guy? Do you want your children to be sustained from staka? No, I've had worse insults said to me, over time. The other ones, though, was a little more severe. And Rav Chisda said, you have to stand up
Is
in
Rava
public.
possibly just convincing, and as opposed to embarrassing. Like,
Okay, but what about the stories of Rav Yehuda and Rav Chisda? When Rav Chisda said you have to stand up in public and say, I'm different than the ravens. L'chayra, that's verbal. L'chayra, yeah, verbal humiliation. And according to Rabbeinu Tam, what would be the difference if someone's not a man of means? You can verbally harass him, and if he's a man of means, you could take it to the next level, but no physical violence.
Why can't you say it's different levels of tzedakah? Like some tzedakah is like a pledge.
No, but it's the same story. We're quoting the same story of Rava. The same story of Rava with Rav Nosson Barami, where he forced him. Taisa says in Baba Basra that the story was only verbal. But in the Gemara number 7, we're clearly make it contrasting. That when the father can't afford, you verbally harass. But when he could, like Rav Nosson Barami, you could mamish enforce.
Maybe they're talking about there's a machlekes with Tosfos and the Gemara about what type of tzedakah it is. Because if it's a tzedakah that's imposed by the bezdin,
No, but it's the same story. It's the same story of
They
Rava.
can have it. But what is the story? One is it imposed by bezdin the tzedakah, or is it imposed?
Rava was doing it as
by
the
himself?
Bezdin. Rava was as the. You're
So
asking.
if somebody took it upon himself as a pledge. So
No,
one
no,
of them
no,
could be
no,
saying,
no,
"Well,
no,
the
no, there's no
even
pledge, there's no
that, you
pledge.
still whack him. But Tyson.
No, there's no pledge, there's no pledge, there's no-
So we're talking about
Tosis is discussing the same. Tosis is talking about this very story. All sources are the same story.
Yeah, the same story.
So only one thing
what happened
happened.
in the story? Was
There's
it
no
a
pledge, no
or was
pledge,
it
no
something
pledge.
That Bezdin said everybody has to give $500 because there's poor people in town. Because that's what Bezdin does.
Either way, you can have a contradiction. But it happens to be that there was no pledge. There was no pledge. But the issue just is that Rabbeinu Tam says there was verbal coercion. But if you look at the way the Gemara presents it, number 7, it seems to be there has to be physical coercion. Just from the fact that the Gemara contrasts it to the father who can't afford, and even he have verbal coercion. So like I said, some say there's different levels of verbal coercion. It's a bissel shver. So go back to Taisus in number 6.
Times you would do it. Here, you
Right.
right. Do it once. Maybe the Torah, I'm going to tell you would do it all till he does.
There's another Gemara in Chulin at the end that says for 22 years they put people in Cherem, a verbal coercion. The Gemara says, why'd they stop? They should have gone forever. Anyhow, look at number 6, back to Taisus. So Rabbeinu Tam's answer is questionable. Of course, if Rabbeinu Tam was here, he would... yeah, he would... anyhow, but okay, he's not here, and therefore we go weiter. Number 6, back to Taisus in number 6. Va'oi tiritz. All right. Va'oi tiritz. Rabbeinu Tam said further, another pshat. Dahacha, so Rabbeinu Tam says, Kiblu aleim shiakufu oisen agaboy. Said Rabbeinu Tam, no, it could be taka that Rava Mamish forced Rav Nosson Barami. You know why? It wasn't regular tzedakah. Maybe this is what you were getting to. It wasn't regular tzedakah. The community was makabel upon themselves at the town meeting that, over the year they'll give this and this amount to tzedakah, and they subjected themselves to the authority of the Gabbai, which means
They used
Rava
to
Mamish
assess
forced.
people, right? In those days, they
used to assess,
you
yeah.
this much, you this much.
Yeah.
That was the way
It's
it
like in
worked.
Switzerland. I was in Switzerland. If you get a ticket in Switzerland, they don't stop give you a ticket. They call you and they go through. They go through your
Based on your
taxes.
income.
Yeah, based on your income, they want to hit you hard.
So then we
So
can-
the fierich, it's
Some
mamash.
of us could speak without any tickets.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyhow, Tahacha kiblu aleim. Fine. So that's the second answer. Fine. Ulari nira comes the Re. The Re says to Rabbeinu Tam's nephew, the B'tzedakah koifin. You know what's going on by tzedakah? Mishum the ispei lav. By tzedakah there's a loisase. D'chsiv bo loisa ameses levavcha v'lois sakboitz v'lois sikboitz v'gemer. The Gemara, the pasuk in Re'eh says besides nos and titin you have to give, it says loisa ameses levavcha. Don't harden your heart. Don't hold back your hand. In fact, the Baal Halachas Gedolos holds it's 2 different
One of the
loisases.
613.
According to the Bahagi, there are 2. There are 2 of the 613. The Rambam disagrees, as he often does on the Bahagi, and the Rambam holds this whole 1 loisase. By the way, the Ramban, the pasuk says in Parshas Re'eh, not only you should give, but v'lo yeira b'lvavcha b'sitcha lo, you shouldn't feel bad when you give. The Ramban says if you give tzedakah but you feel bad, you're over a lav. So there's a third lav. The Ramban writes on the end of the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvah, he says the Rambam forgot a few mitzvahs. One of them is that you're over a loisasa even if you give. But the pasuk says even when you give lo yera b'vavcha b'sitcha loy. Okay, beseder. So too are these. So too lois amas. These are also you're over the lavin by not giving, so they wouldn't carry malchus. So again, the Bahag, the Bahag holds these are 2 lavin. The Rambam holds there 1, but it's a lav. So what's the re saying? So that's why you could enforce it. That's why you could enforce it. Hold on a second. The re is telling us when it comes to a loisase, Bezdin always has the right to enforce it. Even if the same loisase has an asay coupled with it, and the asay happens to be matan schora b'tzida, happens to have the reward next to it, it doesn't matter. Per the loisase, Bezdin can enforce. Now I want to tell you that answer is also questionable. There's a lot of confusion about can Bezdin enforce for a loisase. And we go on a bit of a journey here, but we'll go right away to number 8. Number 8, Chassidische Sefer, the Minchas Chinuch, the times of the Tzemach Tzedek, Yosef Ba'abad, sounds like a Sfardish last name, but it's Ben Av Bezdin. It was a name the family had. And unbelievable Sefer, and he writes number 8. This is on a mitzvah Parshas Boy about not leaving leftovers from the Korban Pesach, but the Minchas Chinuch there goes on a whole Chas v'shalom to say a rant. He goes on a rampage discussing forcing by mitzvahs, and he says like this: Ubeloi sasa, when it comes to a lav, eina mefurish, it's not clear imroitz a lav or loy sasa. If someone's walking into McDonald's. Do you have the right to punch him and beat him up until he, until he's so bruised he won't walk in? Im kaifenoitza, do we force him kadesh loy laver not to be over? Now we'll see in a moment. Whenever we say we're kaifa, are we talking about bezdin or individuals? We're going to see a big machlekes about that. But now we're just discussing asay versus loy sasa. Venira Pashat says in Minchas Chinuch, it seems obvious. Im roitz a lav or al lav, if someone's going to be over a loisase, bekum va'ese actively, if someone will actively eat pork, vadai definitely ein manichnos, so we don't allow it b'shum oifen. The loisase bekum va'ese, if someone will actively violate a loisase, chomer is even worse than aseh, sheroitz a lav b'shev altase. When it came to the sukkah and the lulav that we saw in number 1, what's the guy doing? Nothing. He's being passive. And nevertheless, we force him to do the mitzvah. So imagine if someone's going to be over actively, for sure. The im yaver bekum ve'esei vade aloy sasa chomer, like it's brought in Yavamas. If someone's going to actively violate a loy sasa, for sure, im kem bevadai eim anichanos, we won't allow. Va'ayin chulin kufyud, amud beis de kaiftin, ayin Rashi machmaz the makinoisoi. That's a Gemara we saw in number 2. Generally, by mitzvah we force, achshavku, but they let the guy go with the kibud aveim because matan schora b'tzida. And see Taisus over there, heich koifen alat staka. Taisus in a few places in Shas asked the staka shaila, how could you force on stock if it has the matan schar next to it? The Tirtzim, what was Taisus' answer? We just saw we quoted the Taisus in Baba Basra, but what is the re-answer? That was Rabbeinu Tam. What is the re-answer? Davanami lav. There's a lav of loy sikpoits. What do you see from the re? That when it comes to a lav, it's a no-brainer. Of course he could enforce. Imke mavur, it's clear, says the Minchas Chinuch. Heicha de'ikal lav, if there's a lav, afilu. Now, the re, when it comes to tzedakah, how are you over the lav? By not giving, it's passive. And yet the re says it's obvious you could enforce. For sure, someone's going to actively eat pork. So he says, Heicha de'ikal lav, afilim oive b'shev altase, even if you will passively violate the loisase by not giving tzedakah, by just, by being passive. Nevertheless, kaifin. V'zeh nirali, he sees gamitzad asvar, he says, I don't need any rayas. It's obvious. Kamoishi, just like him, ein roitz alas aseh. If he doesn't want to do an aseh, do oive b'shev altase, he seems to be repeating himself. If someone will be passively missing out in the midst of sukkah or lulav, nevertheless, makinoiser, we force him kivan she'efshel l'kaim because he's able to do the mitzvah. Im kain, if so, hu adin beloy sasa, so to buy a lav, she'ein by maisa, so to buy a passive lav, and he wants to be over passively. Nevertheless, kaifanoiser, will force him not to be over. Why would it be worse than a mitzvah saseh? Or mikol shekain, if he's going to be actively over the lav, will force him makinoise agitates nafshay, in order he shouldn't be over actively. Fine, that's what he says. So the Minchas Chinuch says it's a no-brainer. By a loy sasa, whether it's passive or active, you could enforce it. That's what the Minchas Chinuch says. Now here's the issue though. If you go back to the Gemara in number 1, where the whole source of the discussion comes from, the Gemara, Papa, that quoted a Brisa, that the Brisa meant like this. By a loy sasa, you give 39 lashes. By mitzvah saseh, you can go forever, much more. You can go agitate say nafshay. So, Rabbi Akiva Eger, he learned like the Minchas Chinuch, that there's no question you can enforce by a loy sasa as well. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva Eger asked the following kasha. There's really no difference between a aseh and a loy sasa. Let me explain. He says like this. Once the story is over, if you transgress the lav, you can get 39 malchus. If it was a mitzvah saseh, you get nothing. If it's already sukkah is over, you didn't sit in a sukkah, Beis isn't going to touch you. Post facto, you never have a din of makinoisei ad shetet sei nafshe. If it was a lav, it's 39 malchus and that's it. If it was a... This table is going to look better than ever, huh? It's going to never been. It's going to be glistening. It's going to be glistening. Post facto, there's never a din of achatet say nafshay. Exactly. If it was a loy sasa, you ate pork already, malchus. If you missed tefillin, nothing. If it's during, while the mitzvah is currently noigeya, like the guy is in middle or wants to go to McDonald's or is in the middle of eating, or he's able to sit in the sukkah, it's still during sukkah, he doesn't want to, then by both of them it's makinoi sacha tate se nafshay. So Kiva Eger asks, the Lashon of the Gemara number 1 is the Brisa seems to be saying by loy sas is 39, by mitzvah saseh you go all out. For Kiva Eger, the Chayr, that's not true. Yeah. Post facto, by a lav, it's malchus. By a essay, it's nothing, right? If the day already passed, you don't hit the guy for not wearing tefillin. And if it's during the act, then whether it's an assay or a lav, you go all out. And that's the kasha that he has. But you see from his kasha that he learns like the Minchas Chinuch, that by loy sasa, you do go all out. I will tell you that before both of them, the Ran, one of the last of the Rishonim in Chulin, he asked the exact kasha of Rabbi Kiva Eger, and therefore he answers, he says you have to translate the words of the Brisa. When the Brisa says loy sasa, it doesn't mean a loy sasa. It means post facto. It means if something wasn't done. And when the Brisa says aseh, it means while it's still happening. So the Brisa means like this. Bamed varim, back in number 1, Bamed varim amurim, that you can't go all out and hit the guy forever. If it's loy sasa, if it's already post facto that something wasn't done, then you can never go all out. If it was a lav, 39 malchus. If the asay was lost, you don't touch the guy. But then the Brisa, by mitzvah asay, the Brisa meant if it's something still ongoing. It's a doichik dik pshat in the Brisa, but you see the Ran was bothered by Rabbi Kiva Eger's kasha, and therefore says this answer. So you see the Ran, Rabbi Kiva Eger, the Minchas Chinuch are all on the same side of the boat, that if you can enforce by an asay, you most definitely can enforce by a loy sas as well. And it seems to be Taisis that we just saw by the Re. Not so fast. Let's go to the next page. Yes, that's why it's no. So the chiddush is even. No, I'll tell you what. Even an asay. Right. Even an asay. Loy sas is worse. As we'll see, it's not so. There happens to be a major discussion. What's taka more severe? An asay or a loy saseh? Right. So the big shaila is if somebody, right, they turned it into a whole story, right? There was a plane crash and someone's in the middle of in South America, in the Amazon over there. There's nothing to eat. There's some tray for animals around, or there's his fellow plane passengers that didn't survive. Should he have human meat or tray for meat? Tray for meat, you'll violate a loy saseh. Human meat, you'll violate an asay. First of all, according to many, there's an asay to bury a human body. So you'll be violating that. More importantly, there's an asay, you can't have benefit from a human body. There could be another assay that you can't eat from a human body. And the shaila is, what's a bigger deal to be over?
What's a few assays in one list?
Right. On the other hand, by
I'll tell you whatever the answer is. I'm eating the meat.
That's human meat?
Adam
The horse. Whatever it is.
Right. So the truth is, it's a big debate. In fact, I'll tell you the truth is, most people most people want to say, you have to eat the human meat because the loy sasa of the animal is more severe. The Maharam ben Chaviv, the Moshe ben Chaviv, one of the greatest Fardische Rabbanim in Yerushalayim, about 400 years ago, he's medayik. What? He's medayik from the Rambam. He believes the Rambam might hold that actually you have to eat the treifa meat. It boils down to a question: what's more severe, an aser or loy saser? On the one hand, an essay pushes away a loy saser. On the other hand, we know there's a halacha that if someone is about to violate a lav, you have to spend all your money to prevent the lav from happening. By mitzvah asay, only till a fifth of your possessions. So what's more severe? Also, when an essay is doicha loy saser, let's say somebody has tsaras on the place of the bris milah. So there's a mitzvah asay to do the bris milah. There's a loy saser to cut off tsaras. So you have to weigh it up. If you're going to do the bris milah, now, when you fulfill a mitzvah essay with an action, it's an incredible thing. Your mamshich, godliness from the higher worlds. When you fulfill a loy saser, it's passive. You fulfill not murdering by doing nothing. L'chor, it's a smaller fulfillment. The Alter Rebbe in Chassidus says, "Fakert by loy saser, it's so great it can't be drawn down through an action." But b'pashtus, when you fulfill a loy saser, it's not as grand as a mitzvah saser. You didn't kill, you did nothing. So, but when you fulfill an asay, it's greater. On the other hand, when you violate a loy saser, it's very severe. You actively went against God. When you violate a mitzvah saseh, no, you just did nothing. So you have to weigh it up like this. If you're going to do the bris milah, you're doing a wonderful fulfillment. You're doing a positive command of bris milah. On the other hand, you're doing an active violation of cutting tsaras. So there's a major fulfillment, but there's a major transgression. If you do nothing, so you're getting a small fulfillment because you're you're keeping the law by not doing anything. On the other hand, you're also doing a small transgression because you're over the asay passively. So if you do nothing, you have a small fulfillment and a small transgression. If you do the asay, you'll have a big fulfillment. You'll also have a big transgression. So the shaila is how do you weigh this up? So it could be that the fulfillment of the asay is so grand that
covers the grand sin.
Right. But in the case when you're in the Amazons, by not eating the asay there, when you eat the human body, you're breaking the asay. If you eat the treifa meat, you're not fulfilling an asay, you're just avoiding breaking an asay. Yeah. So even the asay is doicha loy saseh. Yeah, it doesn't mean that in the case of the Amazons, the essay would be greater than the lav, because by eating the treifa meat, you're poshut violating a lav actively, and what are you being mekayim? You're just passively not violating the asay.
Is this the case when you talk about?
Anyhow, so that's why the things could be different. But what? Yeah, for sure, exactly.
Also, the poskim talk about shechita on Shabbos. They comparing shechita on Shabbos if he has to eat something.
Yes.
Or chazer.
Yes.
Chazer is ready to eat, so they say that even though shechita has more isurim,
yes,
but it could be the miyuskite to the person.
The miyuskite.
He might refrain from having.
Oh, then his life's in jeopardy. If he won't eat it, he won't eat it. Right. There's a rush. The rush. Correct. Which one has more miyuskite? The human body. Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's what he. Anyhow, but I'll call upon him. So here, number 9 and number 10, we have a debate between the K'tzais HaChoshen and the Nesivos HaMishpat, where the K'tzais HaChoshen of Aryeh Leib Heller lives in the times of the Alter Rebbe. And he was a big Gaon, and he wrote an incredible sefer on Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat called K'tzais HaChoshen. He was a Kohen.
Do you have a sefer here?
Sure. And there was a fellow a couple years younger than him, Rabbi Yankov Loiberbaum, the Nesivos HaMishpat, who was very famous, a big Rav in Lissa. The Nesivos HaMishpat got a hold of the Ktsois HaChoshen's commentary, and the Sivus HaMishpat felt that he has a lot to say about this. So he wrote a commentary on Shulchan Aruch called Nesivus HaMishpat, and in it he's consistently referring to the Ktsois HaChoshen and debating with him. Now the Ktsois HaChoshen was a very poor man, and he could barely, how many copies of his Sefer did he make? Very few. It wasn't publicized. By the Nesivus HaMishpat, who was a man of means, by him, he publicized the Ktsois HaChoshen Sefer through all of the critique that he had on it. He actually publicized it. The Ktsois HaChoshen then got hold of the Nesivus HaMishpat, and he felt he has a duty to defend himself, and he wrote something called Meshoiviv Nesivus, where he responds back to the Nesivus. Responding back to the Nesivus. So look at number 9, the Nesivus HaMishpat. The Nesivus HaMishpat says number 9, La'aseh sukkah ve'enoi oiseh. If someone doesn't want to make a sukkah, the kaifin oiseh, we force him l'kayim ha-mitzvah. Kol adam mitzvah lahafrish chaveri me'iser. It's not on Bezdin, he says. Afilu mi she'eino bichlal Bezdin. Even someone who's not on the Bezdin, any person can force his mate to resist from the Isser. If someone has a Jewish slave already, it's Yovel already, Shekolu Yamav, and the Eved wants to stay because he's married to a Goyish Shifcha, which he's allowed to do while he's an Eved Ivri. But once Yovel comes, he has to go free, but he wants to stay. Yachol Rabbi La'koisa, the Rav can hit him, Kedei Lafrishoy, to separate him, Me'isr Shifcha, from the Isser of living with the Goyish maidservant, which he's no longer allowed to do. The Nesivus HaMishpat learns from here that whether it's an aseh, whether lois aseh, because that's the case in Baba Kama, it's a lois aseh about the guy wanting to remain with the shifcha. It's an isser of lo yiyeh kodesh. A Jewish man can live with the shifcha. And he says the rabbi is beating him up. The rabbi is not bezdin. It's a raya that whenever you're able to force, anyone can do it. Which means if someone is going into McDonald's or if someone's b'chlal eating outside a sukkah, you could physically pick him up and throw him in the sukkah. Look at number 10. Says number 10, it starts with the one-liner underneath number 10. Umasha Amru b'nirtza, says the Ktsas. It says about Nirtza, Shekalu Yamav, that his days are done. The Yachol Rabbi La'koisa, the rabbi can hit him, Lahafrisha me'isr shivcha. Now on the left side, Hainu Lafrisha me'isr. The Ktsai says like this, when it comes to a lav, anyone can enforce. V'chein misharoya chaveri loy v'shatnez. You see, your friend is wearing one of those fancy Italian suits, which some of them are notorious for having shatnez. Yachol lefoishtemil of, you should go and pull him afilu b'shuk. You pull off the pants. The pants don't usually have shatnez. But if you happen to know that the pants have shatnez, even b'shuk. Avol the koifo for mitzvah aseh, it's weaker. Says the Ktsas, to enforce an aseh is weaker. K'goy misha'eno is a sukkah or doesn't give tzedakah. Lozet sarach bezdin dafka. That you need a bezdin. These days you don't really have a real bezdin because you don't really have real smicha, as per our shir. But the Gemara says famously, Anan shlichusai de kamoy avdinon. We are continuing the shlichus. Today's Rabbanim are continuing the shlichus of the Rabbanon, the times of the Gemara and the Mishnah. Says the Ktsas like this: when it comes to a lois aseh, yeah, you can knock out the guy if he's going into McDonald's. But when it comes to an aseh, only bezdin. And then he continues. So what do you see from here? That a lois aseh is even more strict than an aseh. Anyone could do that. But then he says, "V'gam la'afrishay me'isr nami." Even when we say that the rabbi or anyone can separate a person from the isr, einoi el hakor ba'alma. You can't beat the guy till he dies. It's just a little patch. Avo bezdin, but bezdin shekoyfen l'kayim aseh. When bezdin forced to aseh, it's makin noisei achetetze nafshay. Bezdin can go achetetze nafshay. Kagoin ba'omer sukkah eni oisa. I'm not doing the sukkah. Ve'ilu b'yisurin, but by yisurin ein makin achetetze nafshay. You can't hit the guy till he dies. The loy amru nitin latzila b'nafshay ba'veris how you do him. When it comes to a roidif acher nar moros, if someone's running after to rape an erva, you're allowed to kill the guy. Or if someone's running after someone to kill them, you're allowed to kill the guy. But if someone's running to break Shabbos or running to do Avodah Zarah, the Gemara never says you could kill the guy. So you can't say that by a lav you can force him on shetetzei nafshay. It means hakor ba'alma.
But I say,
But when I say the bezdin can go all the way, or b'makom shekanoim poigim boy. Right. No, that the shluchusai the kamoy explains if you need a bezdin today's but they didn't aren't real but they didn't. You don't have real smicha. For that we say that the bet they didn't today are continuing what they used to do on Mo. Yeah.
We could also on
A bezdin. Yeah. A bezdin. Yeah.
We can kill him.
Well, the minchas chinuch in another mitzvah disagrees. The minchas chinuch elsewhere in another mitzvah tainas. Bezdin can only do the shlichus of the rabbanim of thousands of years ago by something which is common. Anything which is not common is lost, like judging knossos or things like that. Minchas chinuch says, to beat someone till he dies for not doing a mitzvah of sukkah is uncommon and we can't do it. So that happens to be another issue. But says the ksos will be shar isurin by other isurin loy nit matzila benafshe. You can't kill him kedei la'afrisha. So. Let's see. I have a big issue with this ksos over here. He seems to be saying like this: a lav is more severe than the asay, because by a lav anyone could enforce it. By an asay only bezdin. But then he says this that anyone could enforce the lav is only a bissel petch. You can't knock him out completely. You can only do that if someone's running to kill someone, right? By an asay go all the way. Who bezdin? But by a lav. But what about bezdin by a lav?
They go all the way.
No, that's what I would think.
Why not?
I would imagine because the kasha that he asked, what's the difference of all lavin versus if someone's running to rape someone, is for a bystander, for one of us. But as far as bezdin, you would think it's the same. But he says no. He says he brings in a bissel musar, very uncommon. The asay chamir melois asay, and asay is stronger than a lav. Because ba'asei makinat shetetzei nafshe, you go all the way till he dies. And then he explained, v'zeh vada, you should know, im kvar over, I'll say, if it's already sukkahs is over, you're not going to punish him. Elokoidim shekayim asay, but during sukkahs, when he's still able to do it, we hit him at shetetzei nafshe, bichdei lekoifei to do the asay. But b'shar isuri lois asay, eino nitin, you can't kill him, isuri isu neveil sotrevis, the chol zeh border. His maskana seems to be strange. His maskana is like this. In a way, a loisas is worse because any bystander can get involved. By an asay, it's only bezdin. But by an asay, bezdin can go all the way. By a loisas, no one can go all the way, even bezdin. How does he know that? Maybe by a loisas, bezdin can go all the way, just like the Minchas Chinuch said. It's very strange. No, he's saying a lav is more than an asay. Fakert, he says by an asay, a regular bystander can get involved. You can punch someone who's going to go on McDonald's, but a bystander, according to the sus, can't punch someone who's not in a sukkah. The Nesivos holds, yeah.
Right. He says it calls that border, so.
No, I don't know. It's a confusing shtickle over here.
Right, which one's more strict?
Yeah, look, and not just that. How does he know that bezdin by lav can't go all the way?
What does he say?
The difference between when someone's running to rape someone versus Shabbos and Avodah Zarah, it's for a regular bystander. But as far as bezdin,
because the bezdin doesn't happen to be there at that moment.
No, but by an asay, who said bezdin sees the guy outside the sukkah? Bezdin hears about it. They know
talking about in the case where he does.
So too by a loisase, if Bezdin is in front of it, if Bezdin sees the guy walking to McDonald's, can they use unlimited force? L'chayra, they should be able to. Loisase, that the Minchas Chinuch would for sure hold you. How does the Ksois know that they can't?
Probably as far as the Bezdin's conduct should not be less than a bystander.
They should be more.
You know
So should be more. They should be able to go all the way. Anyhow, this is a difficult shtickle, but one thing we know for sure, that when it comes to an asay, the Nesivos holds a bystander could mix in. The Ksois says no, a bystander can't mix in. But they do both agree that generally by lois asay, the halacha applies in general. That you could enforce. It seems from the Ksois you can't force all the way, but some level of forcing you can. Let me just show you. We're going to finish up. All right, let's go quickly. Look at the Rambam in number 11. This is a very for some reason, it's an unknown Rambam. It's in his Sefer HaMitzvahs. After the Rambam goes through all of his sharoshim, the roots of the principles of what counts as a mitzvah or not, he says the following. V'hinehu nois etzli, it's appropriate for me, sha'chaber l'kavana hazois tosefes. I'm going to add something. V'hu she'im zochri ha-mitzvah, whenever I mention a mitzvah, asher leo adin, im esse or loisase, ezker onsha, I'm going to mention the punishment. V'ayman, I'll tell you like this. It's a bit choppy because this is, the Rambam wrote this in Arabic, and this is just a translation. V'ha'oiver, I'm going to tell you whether you're chayiv misa, or chorus, or korban kach v'kach, or malchus, or achas Mrs. Bezdin, or one of the court carried out executions, or tashlumin, or payment. Anything that if I don't mention any punishment, Teda, you should know, if it's a mitzvah loisase, then it's k'moisha amru, k'oivra al mitzvah melech. If I don't mention any punishments, if it's a lav, you should know that you did the wrong thing, but ein lona lo einsha, there's no punishment. The omnam, but if it's a mitzvah saseh, kulam, kol mitzvah mehem, be'ez chiyav asiyos, if it's during Sukkot, yesh lona lahakas b'shaitim, you can hit with sticks, hanimna, someone who holds back masay, ad sheyomas till he dies. I didn't mention before, Rabbeinu Yoina, the great Rabbeinu Yoina learns, even by a mitzvah saseh, when the Gemara says you could knock him out, sheteit say nafshay, doesn't mean till he dies. It doesn't mean that. It means till you weaken him. The Rambam says clearly sheyamos. So that's definitely a debate. Rabbeinu Yoina holds by mitzvah saseh, even Bezin can't kill him. At sheteit say nafshay means till he's exasperated, but it doesn't mean you can kill the guy. The Rambam says no. So you'll hit him until one of three things happen. Either he dies, or sheyasas, he does the mitzvah, or Sukkot ends, sheyavers manchiv. Fine. So many achronim look at the Rambam and they say, if you medayik in the Rambam's words, it sounds from the Rambam that by a loy sasa you never have this idea of forcing. The Rambam clearly divides. So that's mamish against everything we saw.
He says it in the past. He doesn't say it.
He said if it's current, by the lav is past, by the essay is current, right? But the Rambam, so the Rambam's disagreeing with the Ri who said by tzedakah, since it carries a lav you can enforce, but it's worse than that. We said the Gemara in Baba Kama says the master can force the slave, can beat him up to get out of the house, to separate him from living with the shifcha. That means by a lav you could mamish get involved and enforce.
It's still going on though.
Yeah, but the Rambam seems to say it's only by an aseh. He seems to say by a lav it doesn't apply at all. You see that, but you see from that Gemara in Baba Kama, there ain't no difference of an aseh and a lav. Okay. So the Chavis Yoyer, the great Chavis Yoyer answers. The great Chavis Yoyer, he answers. He says very simple. If it's Sukkot and the guy's eating right outside a sukkah, right now he's violating the aseh. If somebody, though, is on his way to McDonald's, what has he done wrong? Nothing. If he's walking into McDonald's, he's not currently violating the lav.
Somebody didn't do it lav. Once it does the lav,
says the Chavis Yor, you know what the Shaila that the Ksos asks, the Chavis Yor was 100 years before him, but the Shaila the Ksos asks, what's the difference if someone's running to rape someone, that you're allowed to nitin latzila benafsh, you could kill him, versus eating treif? Says the Chavis Yor, it's pashut. When it comes to raping, you don't have to wait till the middle of the action. If he's on the way to the rape, you can kill him. But if someone's on the way to eat pork, you can't touch him. He hasn't done anything. While he's eating pork, of course you can. That's the same as the aseh. It's be'ez chiv. He says the reason why the Rambam differentiates it is because by a loy sasem, when someone's on the way, you can't stop someone who's about to do a lav. It's only while he's doing it. And then it's exactly like the aseh. And therefore, the Rambam would say, when the Eved Ivri wants to remain with the Shifcha, right? We know he wants to go into the room with the Shifcha. We know it's like Mamish, like in the middle of the Avera.
Well, he is, because he didn't leave.
And they say, but the guy's walking into McDonald's. No, it's different because he's already been with the. They're married. They're married.
The difference between rape, murder, and McDonald's, as an example, is by those there's somebody who's going to be
a victim.
Over here,
even theft, though. Even theft. If someone's about to steal and hurt somebody,
So how does it make the shivchas thing?
So no, because they're already married. It's current. It's current. That's right, if it's a case of Roidif. Right. No, that was the Shiloh of the Ksais. No, but the Shiloh of the Ksais was everybody asked that every Loisa said there's like a din of Roidif, you can kill the guy. Anyhow. So according to this, the Rambam would agree to the Re. When it comes to tzedakah, when you violate the lav, because you don't want to give, you're currently violating the lav. It's current. It's not knocking on the door of McDonald's, so therefore Beis Din could enforce. That's what the Chavos Yair says. Al Kaponim, though, where are we going with all this? We're going to finish up, because actually the crux is right here. So again, we had a Shaila by tzedakah. When it comes to tzedakah, how could Beis Din enforce tzedakah? L'chayre, it has matan schora b'tzida, and the rule is if the Torah gives the reward next to it, then Beis Din doesn't stick their nose in. So Rabbeinu Tam said it's only verbal coercion. The Re said it's by a loisasa, and that took us on this whole discussion here. But if you go back to Tosfos in number 6, Tosfos isn't done yet. Tosfos gives another answer. Uluritzva. In Uluritzva has a major chiddush, nira, Daha de ein Beis Din muzhar na mitzvah shematan schor b'tzida. When the Gemara said in Chulin that if a mitzvah has its reward next to it, Beis Din doesn't stick their nose in, it means they don't have to stick their nose in. But they could if they want. Hainu de ein noshim, Beis Din won't be held responsible if they don't stick them, but they definitely could. V'chein mashma b'Yerushalmi merchas asfina. The only problem is like this. If you look in the Gemara in Chulin, when they took that guy that wasn't honoring his parents, they tied him to the pole, and the visiting Amers, what are you doing? It's matan schara b'tzida, don't stick your nose in. But according to the Ritzvah, if Beis Din has the option to do so, what's the story in number 2 there with the guy that they tied up? The Beis Din always has the option to do it. So Vayhi the Chol HaBasar says the Ritzvah, he answers, D'lo have a Moikravu, why did they tie him up? V'arma lahu shavku, and they ended up letting him go. Hachi Perushay. What the visiting Amr told Rav Chisda was, Einchem, since you're not muzur la'achrichoy, since you don't have to force him, ad sheyasa, until he complies. Like other mitzvahs, imam le'aseh sukkah v'lulav ve'ein makzit and afshah k'rom ba'kosef. According to the Ritzvah, the Gemara comes out a bit doichik. Again, Rav Chisda tied the guy to a pole because he wasn't honoring his parents. The visiting Amir said, it's matan schor b'tzida, the reward is next to it. And therefore you don't have to coerce him.
So don't.
Yeah,
it's none of his business. Rav Chisda is the Beis Din.
This is also clearly a proactive
it's a very,
These guys
it's a very difficult shot. I will tell you though that the Ramah though paskins, I don't have the Ramah paskins like this shot of the Ritzvah. When it comes to giving back a mashkin, if Shimon borrows from Reuven money and Reuven takes the mashkin from him, there are certain times if Shimon needs the mashkin, Reuven has to give it back. But the pasuk says, give it back and Hashem will bench you. And the Ramah says it's a mitzvah essay with matan schara b'tzida, and the Ramah said Beis Din can't force, but he quotes the Ritzvah. It means Beis Din has a choice. That if the matan schara is next, with Beis Din has a choice. But then the Gemara number 2 is very difficult. What was this visiting Amir sticking his nose into Rav Chisda's business? If Beis Din always has the right, even by mitzvah's essay with the matan schara b'tzida, has the right to force or not enforce, if they choose to enforce, why was he sticking his nose in? So all of these answers of Tosfos.
Even if he sticks his nose in, why
so hold on.
Let him go.
So hold on. So where is this taking us? We got to go to number 12. There's a psak. Chayev lahasker malamid lebnoi lalamdoi. A person has an obligation to hire a teacher to teach his kid Torah. This is number 12. Aval ben, this is from the Shulchan Aruch. For ben chaverei, you don't have to pay for your friend's son to learn Torah. But your own son you do. Hagos says that Amah, they would force lisker lebnoi malamed. If someone didn't want to teach his kid Torah, they would force him. If he's not in town and he has property, if we could tell him, we'll tell him. If not, we'll just sell his property without him. And this is a psak, this is Hagoyis Maiminis, who was a Kohen, by the way, a student of the Maram of Rottenburg. There's a psak over here that Beis Din can enforce someone to teach their kids Torah. So there's an old question, a major old question on this, from the Nachlas Tzvi. Lived about 200 years ago. He said, wait a second. In Vahayim Shemai it says, V'limadatim oisam es b'nechem. Uchsavta mal mezuzas, and then it says Laman Yirbu Yemechem. The Gemara in Shabbos quotes two opinions. If Laman Yirbu is going only on Uchsavta mal mezuzas, or going back to V'lemanatim Oisim es Benechem. Says the Nachlas Tzvi, there's 50% chance it's going back to V'lemanatim Oisim es Benechem. It's two opinions. If it is, it's a mitzvah aseh to teach your kids Torah with the matan schar next to it. Bezdin can't force. It's 50-50 if you could force or not. And whenever it's 50-50 by money, you leave it status quo. So he asks, how could the Ramah Paskin, Bezdin has the right to enforce the guy to pay? Why can't the guy say, it's two opinions, you prove that you can enforce. The Nachlas Tzvi has a whole arichas. He writes, he went to all the Gaonim of his time, peppering everyone. Sometimes people have their kasha that, when you see someone new, you pepper him with that kasha. So he says, he peppered all the big Gaonim with this kasha. Again, the kasha is, it's 50-50 if teaching your kids Torah is considered matan schara b'tzida. It depends if Laman Yirbu links to mezuzah or goes back to V'lemanatim Oisim es Benechem. It's a debate in Masechta Shabbos. But how could Bezdin enforce the father to pay money for the kid to learn Torah? It's 50-50 if the Bezdin can enforce or they can't enforce. No. What's the lav? Doesn't say there's no lav. There's no lav. There's no lav. So if you look in the Minchas Chinuch in number 13,
It's in the dryer.
the Minchas Chinuch says, you want to know what I say about Stocker? He says, number 13, Lulei Divrei Rabbeinu Rishonim. If not for all the Rishonim asking about the Stocker case, Shekulam Tafsu B'Moishlan, they all understood that Stocker is mitzvah matan schar b'tzida. Any maven, I don't understand. The pasuk says Nos and Titen, you should give. V'lo yera b'levavcha, you shouldn't feel bad when you give. Im Kain, the Minchas Chinuch says an incredible thing. The mamash can be done in 3 minutes. Im Kain, he says, Hashem says give tzedakah. Hashem says don't feel bad when you give. And then Hashem says, because I'm going to bench you. What's Hashem benching you for? For the giving or for the not feeling bad? He says, Efshir de matan schar koyal tovus halev. The matan schar is for the good feeling. The actual giving, there's no schar in the chumash, so you can enforce it. Aval ikar tzedakah never says matan schar klal. Now, if you look in the Sefer Ha'ikrim, it says the same thing. The Eibusha said, give and don't feel bad when you give. For the don't feel bad, Hashem promised a reward. For the actual giving, Hashem never said that you can enforce. I'll tell you, the Alter Rebbe gave a similar answer to this, but people think it's the same, it's different. The Alter Rebbe said it's more of a chap. The Alter Rebbe said, the Torah says give tzedakah, don't feel bad, and I'll bench you. It could be the bracha is going on both the giving, but when do you get the bracha? If you don't feel bad. This guy who's being forced to give feels bad, so he doesn't get the bracha.
He doesn't feel bad anymore because he actually.
No, that's only by korbanos. You don't have to have that by tzedakah. Only by korbanos. Right. Exactly. That's how the Rebbe's chap is. You only get the bracha if lo yeira b'vo. If this guy's being forced, boy, he's not interested. He doesn't get the bracha, so you can force him. That's the answer the Alter Rebbe gave. Anyhow, but Al Kapanim, But then the Minchas Chinuch continues. He says, "B'chal gam nira by mitzvah tzedakah there's many psukim. It only says matan schar by one of them. He says like this: by kibud av ve'em, both times in the Chumash it says the schar. By tzedakah it only says one time. He says, wait a second. When it comes to mezuzah is written twice. In Parshas Shema, it doesn't give any reward. In Vahaya, it gives a reward. How do you judge mezuzah? Can Bezdin enforce mezuzah? Is it a mitzvah aseh with matan schar b'tzida? The Minchas Chinuch Tain is no. Matan schar b'tzida is only if every time the Torah speaks about it, it says the reward. By tzedakah, one time it says the reward, other times it doesn't. It's like mezuzah. Says the Minchas Chinuch, by mezuzah it's obvious you enforce. He doesn't have a raya for that. But the Minchas Chinuch says, by mezuzah it's obvious that you enforce. One time it gives the schar, but the other times it doesn't. And therefore he said tzedakah is the same thing. So according to that, by going back to number 12, by teaching your kids Torah, the same thing. It says, V'shinantam levanecha in Parshas Shema, there's no reward. So according to the Minchas Chinuch, just like mezuzah, you obviously can enforce, because it only says the schar one time. So too by teaching your kids, it only says the schar one time. And therefore, the whole kasha, the Nachlas Tzvi went across the whole Poland and Lithuania, peppering people. The Minchas Chinuch says, but now the Nachlas Tzvi quotes this amongst his discussion, quotes this answer. He throws it out for whatever reason. But the clinch we want to say is like this. There's a Ritva, And the Ritva says this about Stocker, but we're going to apply it also to teaching your kids Torah. The Ritva says, everyone knows, all the Rishonim are arguing, why did Rava force the guy to give tzedakah? Is it not a mitzvah saseh with the schar next to it? Says the Ritva, you have to think for a minute. Why? Just because the schar is next to it, therefore Bezdin don't stick their nose in? What's the logic? Rashi said that the Eibush is telling you, the mitzvah carries the schar. If you don't do the mitzvah, the consequence is you won't get the schar. It's your choice. You can make the choice. If you want to say, I don't need the schar, you can do that and shoot yourself in the leg. It's your business. But says the Ritva, when it comes to tzedakah, the mitzvah, people need you. This is not just about you. The anim are lacking. There's a tzorich, a chsaron of the anim. You don't have the right to say this is all about me and I have the choice, do I want the schar or not the schar? There's two to tango over here. The anim need you. And therefore you don't have the right to make the call that I don't think I need the schar, I don't need the mitzvah.
Kid learning Torah.
Now, what are kibud av v'eim, honoring your parents? So he said it's different. This goes back to a shir we had. It could be that if kibud av v'eim is primarily a mitzvah ben adam lamokim, we had a whole shir a number of months ago. If it's primarily, it seems from the Ritva, it's primarily ben adam lamokim. It's between you. The Eibishter says take care of your parents. If you don't, you have to ask the Eibishter for mechila. It's not an interpersonal mitzvah. The Ritva doesn't say it clearly, but he does say the chsaron of the anim is different than the parents. I don't know, but I'll tell you, hold on. Based on the Ritva's answer by tzedakah, everyone wants to, they tell the Nachlas Tzvi, apply the same thing teaching your kids Torah. When the Eibishter says you got to teach your kids Torah, it's not about you. It's about you have to make sure your kids learn. You don't have the right to say, well, the Torah says it comes with the reward, so I'm going to say, well, I don't need the reward, so I'm not going to do the mitzvah.
Your kids need you.
You can only say that when the mitzvah is taka all about you. You could say, well, listen, Hashem gives me the right to make the call. Do I want the schar or not? But when it's about the other person receiving, like the Ritva says about tzedakah, or about making sure the kids learn Torah, you don't have the right to make that call. And therefore, the Ramah paskins that the Bezdin will go to your possessions and take what's necessary. Okay, this is the end of the discussion.
Example, they don't need, other people don't need you. Like one.